journey of faith, my friend. A head that's filled with knowledge soon is too bloated with its own weight to fit through heaven's gate. So think with your heart, it's the only organ for salvation. Think with your heart, don't deduce yourself to eternal damnation. Think with your heart, 'cause you know that the Almighty sees us. Think only with your heart. Whoever heard of the bleeding brain of Jesus? Think only with your heart.
Gandhi was once asked what he thought about Western civilization. His answer was, "I think it would be a great idea." Or more like, "I think it would be a great idea." And what a great idea it would be indeed, because this is not civilization, my beloved truth seekers. This is a feudal system where we exchange our intrinsic rights for a Best Buy toy on sale. This is a bleak utopia where we reach our goals by climbing over the bodies of those we have backstabbed, cheated on, and neglected. This is a mirror maze where celebrity marketing, Spielberg shrinks, and New Age oracles reveal twisted reflections back at us that our vampiric egos accept and lead us further into the dark night of the soul. I can be Kim Kardashian or Lil Wayne if I gain the world and lose my soul.
It's all true. It's all real. Nothing here is fake. Nothing you see on this show is fake. It's merely controlled.
This is quiet desperation, salvation a la mode in a cup of tea, and eternal damnation in a cubicle with a yearly trip to Cancun or Las Vegas or just the bottom of a Lafroig on ice. This is a sanitized concentration camp where our churches, our schools, our governments, and our jobs don't care about us and never will, except to squeeze a little more juice out of our divine sparks to satisfy their addictions.
What truth? That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind.
Like the book of Thomas the Contender says, your hope is set upon the world, and your God is this life. You are corrupting your souls. Yes, Western civilization would be a good idea. And maybe it's time we made it manifest, looking back at the bright pockets in history, where the Gnostic, the Neoplatonist, the Hermetic, the Kabbalist, the Troubadour, the Freethinker altered their inner realities and exploded like supernovas of creative fury and heroic radical ideologies, and thus forever change the collective perception of humanity.
Source code is not time travel. Rather, source code is time reassignment.
Like them, we must draw into our indwelling Hermes or Apollos, become thermonuclear plants of solar imagination, fearless invention, daring speculation, and event horizon art, expanding our consciousness beyond the barbed wire borders of sanity and conformity until we touch something that is greater than ourselves and find our own personal sacred duty or knight's quest. Each one of us has this power, but our hearts have been sterilized since childhood by the archons, who told us to follow our dreams, but programmed us to follow the dark fantasies of the establishment.
I know we're all pretty small in the big scheme of things, and I suppose the most you can hope for is to make some kind of difference. But what kind of difference have I made? What in the world is better because of me?
And now it's time to open our eyes before the rulers of this age lastly introduce their final solutions. Apathy, narcotic fear, synthetic self-esteem, and a new show with George Lopez, and turn us from toiling slaves to the offspring of the zombie apocalypse.
This is now the United States of Zombieland.
We all house that ability to change our interior reality and stand with our brothers and sisters in the desert of the real as they loose the hounds of peer pressure on us. Like Carl Jung said, but if you have nothing at all to create, then perhaps you need to create yourself. And of course I'll suggest Gnosis, although you are free to follow and find your own bliss any way you can. I've described it 100 ways in past shows, but I like how my friend Jesse described it, and I'm gonna paraphrase it.
Are you incapable of restraining yourself, or do you take pride in being an insufferable know-it-all?
At some point in your life, you feel or experience a revelation, an epiphany. That is the call of Sophia, her offering of the red pill. Gnosis is the light of that epiphany or revelation, wielded to reveal your surroundings. It is that vision that separates the light from the dark, you from your ego, the road to perdition from the ascending path of 1,000 tests that will purify you into a man or woman of light, a truth seeker warrior. Gnosis is the beginning of the greatest adventure you'll ever take in your countless incarnations.
It's like God's vagina.
As the Nag Hammadi Library's Sophia of Jesus Christ says, whoever is worthy of Gnosis will receive it, for he is an immortal in the midst of mortal men.
Why, oh why didn't I take the blue pill?
So you have come to Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio once again, like you do every week, weary and worn from the gladiator pits of society, to find another slice of the almost lost ancient wisdom that can be utilized to finally begin Western civilization. Then again, many occultists have said that the peak of humanity were the Greeks and Plato's Academy. That was Western civilization. And we've been devolving ever since, on our way to a backward Big Bang.
You think Einstein walked around thinking everyone was a bunch of dumb shits?
I hadn't thought of that.
Now you know why he built that bomb.
Einstein said he didn't know how World War III would be fought, but that World War IV would be fought with sticks and stones. At this rate, we might be fighting with sticks and stones by the time World War III rolls around.
We're all monkeys.
Who knows? But again, we can control what we can control. So welcome with kindness and love to Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio, broadcast from the virtual Alexandria through the God Above God Dadcam. On this September 10th, the year of our Demiurge 2011. Welcome to the Sanctuary of Truth, the Temple of Self-Knowledge, and the Ashira Grove of Transcendence.
You are not in Kansas anymore. If there is a hell, you might want to go there for some R&R.
Aeon Byte is not for everyone, though. If you feel you're a balanced person who contributes to society because you pay taxes and donate to some forest in Nepal, or maybe vote and jog and attend some Caucasian lukewarm church when you can, then turn this off. They've already incepted your dreams with junk and lies and self-importance. You're better suited if you go watch Dancing with the Stars, because you will not help the cause of freedom. You'll just live a vanilla life in a vanilla sky, and one day you'll have a stroke at 60 while mowing your yard, and history will not even notice.
I see all this potential, and I see it squandered. God damn it, an entire generation pumping gas, waiting tables, slaves with white collars.
Also, if you think God is everywhere, including kiddie porn, working in mysterious ways like with Holocaust and African droughts, and all you need is love and positive thoughts, and it's all just an illusion, please jump off a building and see how God's mystery and illusion treats you. Maybe all those healing crystals and paperbacks of Jonathan Living Seagull in your pockets and your fat Wiccan arse will save your life when you fall.
My mom always said life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you...
In the name of Ron Perlman, I've always wanted to do that. Anyway, if you think I'm going to burn in hell in the name of Jesus Christ, well, happy heresies, and stick around, because today's show will make you so irate you'll have to polish your bishop to a picture of Sarah Palin just to calm down.
John McCain has already tapped me and said that's where I want you.
I will let you partake of rich, succulent Sarah Palin. Pretty bush.
Like Oliver Wendell Holmes said, controversy equalizes fools and wise men, and the fools know it. And you can call me Abraxas, your hosts of hosts, in my mortal incarnation of Miguel Connor. I am no scholar, no theologian, no guru, no religious leader, or leader of any kind for that matter. I am simply a midwifer of forbidden and contraband truths that I offer to the thirsty for knowledge and the hungry for manna from the pleroma. I am a friend for the lonely, that we may share a laugh or two in a cruel, cold universe. I am you. I am that dream of you. Even you, the fundagelical beating off. And I also settle a lot of debts.
This is bullshit. I'm not listening to this. You are insane.
No, you're insane. And we simply do not have time for this crap.
And we will be settling a lot of debts and getting very controversial, as we are joined by my good and dear friend, Keith Nicholson, to discuss his new book, A Rebuke of the Christian Church. Keith joined us on Aeon Byte number 141 to discuss his meritorious work, Above, Below, Within, Planetary Magic and the Greek Gods, where he basically went Martin Luther on the neo-pagan movement with a scathing admonition.
Go ahead and run! Run home and cry to mama!
This time Keith takes on another lost sheep religion, Christianity. I must note that although over 200 pages, A Rebuke of the Christian Church is really part of his upcoming opus, Idolater. But it's a sacrosanct radioactive work that will tear your heart open and shed tears you couldn't believe were there. I mean, we've all heard and experienced the Umbra side of Christianity. We know, especially in America, that Protestant churches have become dens of materialistic thieves, apocalyptic scaremongers exploiting mass media, political lobbyists with golden vaginas excreting creationism replicants, a nest of hypocritical vipers, and an undercurrent of subtle bigotry, sexual pillaging, and anti-gay crusaders that are so far back in the closet they're touching Christmas presents.
The Lord also tells me to tell you, God will destroy the homosexual community of America. But He will not destroy it with what many minds have thought Him to be. He will destroy it with fire. And many will turn and be saved, and many will rebel and be destroyed.
On the other hand, many American churches have absorbed the tenets of New Age, offering quick-fix theology, fridge magnet spirituality, and salvation to the highest bidder in plush mega churches, in nice white bread neighborhoods, far away from the people that Jesus would have spent time with.
Your tiny Jesus, your golden fleece diapers with your tiny little fat balled up fist pawing.
He was a man. He had a beard.
Look, I like the baby version the best. Do you hear me?
In a semi-autobiographical rebuke of the Christian church, Keith gives us all these goodies, but even some you've never heard of, tucked away deep in the cellars of so many churches. And these facts, as well as the suffering and abuse Keith went through for decades, simply because he truly tried to emulate the more altruistic message of Christ, will make your blood boil and your head swim. Here are some interesting statistics taken from a study conducted by an evangelical minister, Brian Chappell. Approximately 1/3 of American adults say they have had a born-again experience, and the figure has remained consistent for several years. Surveys find little difference, however, when comparing the behavior of these born-again Christians before and after their conversion experiences.
Free will, it is a bitch.
In fact, these surveys indicate that in 3 major categories, use of illegal drugs, driving while intoxicated, and marital infidelity, behavior actually deteriorates after commitment to Christ. The incidence of drug use and illicit sex roughly doubles after conversion, and the incidence of drunk driving triples. Recent survey also indicates that the incidence of divorce is actually higher among those identifying themselves as evangelical. A Zogby poll reported that internet pornography sites were visited by 18% of surveyed born-again Christians, a figure just 2 percentage points lower than the national average.
Yeah, man, I'll tell you what, that dang old internet, man, you just go on there and point and click, get in there and talk about www.com, and you got them naked chicks on there, man. You go click, 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 click. It's real easy, man.
Ooh, not looking good, my beloved truth seekers. I don't know. It was St. Augustine that said that the church would always have more demons than saints, because it would always worship at the altar of man instead of the divine. Keith does offer solutions, and they are as insightful as they are shocking, my beloved truth seekers. But we do need that Western civilization, sooner or later. Beyond metaphor, allegory, and basic charity, he proposes the power of myth that can literally transform Jewish and Christian writings into tools for spiritual evolution and a virtuous life, especially when correlated to other mythologies. I've babbled enough on Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio about how myth is an independent pursuit for supernal awareness, as Plato's Academy understood it before we began devolving.
Mankind's been trying to kill each other off since the beginning of time. Now, we finally have the power to finish the job.
A rebuke of the Christian church is not in print yet, again because it will be part of the bigger book Idolater. You can download it at Keith's website, nolamagic.com. That's NOLAMAGICK.com. Certainly worth the shekels, since his bittersweet story, insights into Christianity, and sermonettes on corrupted religion in our non-existent Western civilization are provoking, my beloved truth seekers.
Are you a clergyman or just a PR man? When you come right down to it, Mr. Carter, is there any difference?
And Keith has graciously offered a percentage of the sales to Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio, a truly kind gesture. Donations or any type of assistance are always a blessing, even if it's the many skills I don't have. Your support is essential for Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio. Thank you for those who have supported this Hobbit venture via donations or downloading shows or buying our books. But more help is necessary if this venture is to continue at this or any level. If everyone simply donates $1 or buys a show every week, I can break even and even reinvest in the show, as well as larger cells where I keep my guests until they agree to be interviewed.
It rubs the lotion on its skin. It does this whenever it's told.
Again, your support is essential. And please spread the heretical world to anyone seeking the road less traveled or the highway to hell. So keep supporting Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio any way you can. It's obvious that I've decided to stay and fight in this venture after the hiatus. Join me in the greatest battle to awaken those who wish to be awakened, love those who need love, and fight those who have made us psychic castrati for so many lifetimes. Welcome to a world without sin. Welcome to reality and the means to escape it. Welcome to hopefully the beginning of Western civilization. Welcome Demi Moore. And lastly, welcome Keith Nicholson.
When I watch these TV evangelists on late night cable channel 666 and see the stadium full of people giving hard-earned money away to some chrome-head, sweat-covered, barking con man dangling eternal salvation in the front of these poor bastards like a leash in front of a chihuahua with one kidney, well, I am shocked at our lack of common sense. Clearly, this crook on TV couldn't be more full of shit if he were a porta-potty at the Lollapalooza Festival.
This is the Aeon Byte interview. And with us, we have the pleasure of being joined by my friend, Keith Nicholson, to discuss his new work, A Rebuke of the Christian Church. How you doing, Keith?
Hey, Miguel, I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing great, and thanks for coming on.
I appreciate you having me on again, man. I really do.
It's definitely a pleasure. Plenty of heresy and idolatry between us can be made.
They're going to kill us before it's over with.
Yeah. Keith, tell us about your booklet and how it relates to your upcoming opus, Idolater.
Well, I call it a booklet. It's actually 225 pages as of this morning. It is an ebook. My main book that I've been working on since 2003 is at about 600 pages right now, and it is a spiritual biography, and it takes me from the time when I was 5 years old in my first instance with religion up to the time I was 40, and then it was ready to go to the printers when Hurricane Katrina hit. But I had two and a half years after Hurricane Katrina there was just so much Christian and governmental hypocrisy and incompetence that I decided to do a part 4 of the book, which would have brought it from about 550 to 600 pages up to about 700. And I had just got to the point where I was going to send it off to my editor to proof it and to do whatever he needed to do so I could take my eyes off of it for a while. And then my wife got sick and died. Actually, she died 10 months ago today. So with her illness and then her death, I'm going to have to put a part 5 in there, and that's going to bring it up more than 800 pages. And that's too much of a read for a lot of people. So what I decided to do was to break it down into 3 parts. The actual title of the main book, the actual book itself, is called Idolater. The subtitle is A Spiritual Biography of Rebuke, Revenge, and Regret. This is going to be the rebuke section, the one that we're going to talk about today. And it's about 223, 225 pages. And what I did was I pulled different parts throughout the book. The first 600 pages, I pulled different parts out from different chapters, and I kind of made each chapter in the ebook is a little sermonette. So what you do, it doesn't flow, it's not in sequential order, chronological order, and the chapters don't flow from one thought to another. But each chapter is, I guess, an essay or a sermonette, pulled from different mismatched pieces from the main work.
And just out of curiosity, I know you have a lot of stories because you give a lot of stories in your booklet. What do you mean by the Christian hypocrisy during Katrina? Or I remember all I hear about in the news was all these wonderful stories. Everybody knew the government screwed up, but everybody was helping everybody.
Well, actually, the chapter Ed in the ebook that we're talking about today, it is actually I think it's a 235-page part in the main book. So what you got are just some highlights. But one of my favorite ones is, and you really would have to be in New Orleans to appreciate this. But all of us that were part of the diaspora that were sent out and had to evacuate, we couldn't come back home for 2.5, 3 years because the Christian youth groups that came down to gut churches and to gut homes and to do their mission work for a week out of their privileged lives, well, the little girls discovered Bourbon Street, and so you had every time a youth group would come down, say 30 girls would come down, but only 12 would go back because they would start stripping and tending bar. We had 17-year-old bartenders and 16-year-old strippers all up and down Bourbon Street, and it's really funny because all of with everybody gone. And in the immediate aftermath, up to about 2 years afterwards in New Orleans, you had all male-based industries. So you had insurance adjusters, people climbing on top of roofs and doing this and that. You had FEMA people, you had construction people, people with backhoes and bulldozers. So it was all men down here all over the place. But so the first things that opened up were not the restaurants, but it was strip clubs. The day before Katrina, there were 13 strip clubs on Bourbon Street. And when my wife and I came back 2.5 years later, there were 47 strip clubs on Bourbon Street. And you know who housed those? The little overprivileged teenage girls from youth groups, from Baptist youth camps all over the country. It's funny because when the carpetbaggers came down, and then the youth group girls came down, and they started tending bar and stripping in strip clubs, they had buses of legitimate strippers, if you can say legitimate strippers. They had bus loads that were coming down from Dayton, Ohio, from Cincinnati, from New York, from Boston, because they were coming down because of all the, like I talked about a moment ago, it was a male-oriented society down here. You had all the FEMA, construction, government, all that down here. And so they chartered buses, and they were coming down here in buses, but they couldn't get jobs in strip clubs because all the Christian youth girls were working in the strip clubs. So not only did they take our bartending and waiter jobs from us when the restaurants started opening back up, and the few rentable apartments and houses that were here, they were living 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 at a time, just like flop houses. So they took our affordable housing. So we couldn't come down. Then, to add insult to injury, they took the strippers' jobs away from them. So that's one of the situations that's not in the ebook, but it is in the main book. But one of the best ones was a Christian Tupperware party that my wife got hijacked, kidnapped. We It was right after Katrina, and we were in this little cornfield in Illinois. I had found a little part-time job, and a woman that worked there part-time also. She said, "Oh, I've got a job for your wife." Well, we needed a job. Both of us have every job we could get because we were living hand to mouth, didn't know what we were going to, when we could come back home to New Orleans or whatever. So they took her 45 minutes away to Champaign, Urbana, Illinois. To get her there, they took her to cornfields and airports and farms, and they got her there. She had absolutely no idea where she was, and so she goes in, and all these women are running around the living room, from living room to kitchen to bedroom. I wasn't with her, but she told me this, and she was raised Catholic, but she was an atheist. She didn't believe. She had absolutely no experience with Pentecostalism or speaking in tongues or anything. But she was describing to me what had happened to her, and I could fill in the blanks. She said these women were cackling and jibber-jabbering. They were running around, waving their hands in the air, and they were doing backflips. She said they were laying hands on one another, and they were, talking about she said, come to find out it was a Christian Tupperware party. They wanted her to spend her FEMA money that they assumed that she had received to buy Tupperware so that the profits could go to their church. It's like, wait a minute. She said, we came to town with no underwear, no clean clothes. We're living hand to mouth. We don't even have a car. We don't have a place, a permanent place to live. And you're wanting me to give you what little money I might have to give to your church? And they said, well, yeah, it's God's will. And they kept her there for 5 or 6 hours, laying hands on her, running around her in circles, jibber jabber, and saying that they were speaking in tongues. That was not an exceptional story that happened with the hypocrisy after Hurricane Katrina. That was kind of the norm. So
yeah, all these churches wanting that FEMA slice. But Keith, in A Rebuke of the Christian Church, it's basically a dense biographical story of you being exposed to the worst side of Christianity, from your childhood to adulthood, through you being a devout follower to becoming a neo-pagan, in at least 4 states and dozens of churches. Before we venture into some examples that you had to suffer through, why do you think evangelical Christianity has completely lost its way? Or has it never found its way to begin with?
It was never on its way, man. Anytime you get human beings and their egos involved in anything, whether it's erecting a building, whether it's trying to save a cat out in the field or to establish a religion, there's going to be problems right from the get-go. You can look at Stephen. Look at Stephen in the book of Acts. He was the first Christian martyr. He tells the most eloquent, poignant story from the Hebrews, from the time of Abraham up to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, forward to the time that Jesus was crucified. And you sit and if you pray about it and read that story a first time, pray about it, read it a second time, it will just jump to life. The ancient Israelites, they were a stubborn and stiff-necked people. That's quoted all through the Old Testament Scripture, and even Stephen uses that. Christianity went straight from being at its inception. Well, the apostles, the apostles themselves didn't believe anything that Jesus said. There are several instances where Peter would argue with Jesus. He stuck his foot in his mouth. I heard a preacher one time say that Peter had the cleanest feet in all of Palestine because he was always sticking his feet in his mouth. But even the apostles didn't believe Jesus at anything that he said because, for one, they never showed up at the tomb in 3 days to raise him from the dead. Jesus showed them the perfect example when he raised Lazarus from the dead on day 4. What did the apostles do? After they came out of hiding, they went straight back to their secular jobs. They went back to collecting taxes, to catching fish. They went as far away from the scene of the crime as possible. They didn't believe him. Paul certainly didn't believe. I mean, of course, we're talking about figurative people. There's no literal people, but written into the text is a perfect life example that shouldn't surprise us or shock us at all. See, we think about, well, I know how I feel about God. I know how I feel about Jesus. So why can't these other people? Well, you know what? We don't really believe either. Otherwise, we would follow Torah. We would help the poor, the downtrodden. We would do everything that the Bible mandated. We would do what Jesus mandated, but we don't do it. We think we do it. We try to do it. We struggle, but the church was never on its way. The church was never an effective ministry. It was never an effective organization. It never has been and it never will be. And now that Pisces is ending And Aquarius is coming around. You know, I've written several times, and I've written in this booklet that with Pisces, as emotion is water, and we feel it. We feel our religion. We feel how we use our heart and our emotions to gauge our religion and gauge our service to God, quote unquote. We think, well, when Aquarius comes around, that's the mind, that's the intellect. We're gonna do better. We're gonna see people that need our tithe. Instead of feeling good about giving it to the church house or to the TV ministry, we're actually going to give it right into those people's hands. But, you know, there's some truth to that. There's an overall truth to it. But the reality is as long as people are going to be involved, there's going to be problems. There's going to be a bastardized religion. The apostasy has always been here. Paul talks about when the apostasy comes. Apostasy's been here since day one. From the first nail that went into Jesus' left hand, the apostasy was on.
And Keith, can you give us some examples of the worst cases in your life? Perhaps the ones that scarred you the most of the false Christianity you had to deal with?
Probably the first one that got me, the one that I remember the most, was when I was about 9 or 10 years old. I was involved with a bus ministry and youth, children's youth ministry on Sundays. And part of being involved with the bus ministry, we'd go out on Saturdays and we'd proselytize from door to door, knock on, we'd see a yard with toys or a swing set or something, and we'd go to that door and we'd try to get the parents to let the kids ride the church bus the next day. Well, I did that for several years, but after the first year, the bus minister pulled me to the side one Sunday morning and said, Keith, you're going to have to stop allowing so many black people to come and come to ride on your bus route, come to church. And I said, what? I said, there's only like 4 or 5. And he said, look, all of our money people are talking, and they've gone to the deacon board, and they said that little boy had better stop bringing those niggers to church, or we're going to pull out and we're going somewhere else, and we're taking our tithes and our donations with us. And I looked at him, and I couldn't believe. Now, this was like 1972, 73, 74, somewhere in there. And in the deep south in northeast Alabama, that was not unheard of to hear racial slurs, nigger, whatever. But, I'm saying that as a quote, but for a church bus minister to sit there and tell a 10 or 11-year-old boy, we don't want any more niggers coming to church, that stayed with me my whole life. I mean, I've got my own prejudices and my own racial issues. We all do. Any human being that says they don't, they're a liar. But one thing that I've never understood is how people, when it comes to God, serving God, teaching God, anything to do with religion, how we can segregate ourselves and force segregation as far as races. And then I guess it was synchronicity, because a couple of weeks after that, I was preaching a sermon in the little children's ministry, and the children's pastor was over doing something with the piano, and a little black boy, he hadn't been on my bus route. I didn't know who he was, but he came up and told him, he said, look, these kids are over here giving me a hard time, calling me sunburned and calling me nigger and this and that. And the senior pastor never even looked at him and said, so, did it hurt you? Go sit down. Leave me alone. That's absolutely horrible. Absolutely horrible. It's one thing to use a racial epithet, to an adult at a gas station. But for a little 8 or 9-year-old kid, that's just absolutely horrible. And those instances of severe racism and religion, those are the ones that bother me the most, because Jesus came for that little black boy. If you look at any church, Miguel, any church in America, you look in there, what have you got? Realtors, lawyers, doctors, landlords. Everybody in there is white, upper middle class to upper class, business owner, upper management. Jesus said he came for the broken, for the bruised, for the poured out in spirit. I don't see a damn person in any church where white people attend that are broken, poured out in spirit, abused, and are neglected. They're the ones who are causing those situations. Jesus didn't come for you. If you are an upper middle class realtor, Jesus did not come for you. He has nothing to do with you. You have nothing to do with him. You just use his name and his church as a tagline to generate more revenue for your business. That's all you do.
Yeah, and like we were talking before the interview, I was amazed that Alabama, for example, they would not air Sesame Street until 1974 simply because it showed black children playing with white children, or you write in your book how you would want to watch a simple show like Soap or Cheers or something like that, and they would just stop it and show Billy Graham doing one of his crusades. I mean, there was no separation of church and state where you were.
They do that today. When
they
Ellen,
do? Oh God!
When back in like '97 or '98, when Ellen DeGeneres had a TV show and it was a big coming out episode, same television station, the only one in the country that refused to air it, because it was a gay lesbian, quote unquote gay lesbian episode. The thing about the calling congregants in a church and a little boy a nigger, and those kinds of things. Here in the South, I've said this I don't know how many times, and I'm going to have to go back and I'm going to have to take my college history classes, and I'm going to have to look through those books again. Because I've always said that the Civil War was not fought over slavery; it was fought over economics. But I'm going to have to go back and look at that again, because Jehovah, of all people, infamous Jehovah, in his law that I have bashed for 10 to a dozen years and tried to debunk at every turn. He's got a wonderful little statute in there about slavery. Hey, if your slave says, screw you, I'm out of here, and runs away from you, you're not allowed to go get him. You're not allowed to punish him. That's right. You're not allowed to sell him. He's gone. He's free. So, well, I paid X amount of dollars for him, and I'm losing a profit. Doesn't matter. That's one of God's laws. So in the South, the Southerners, the plantation owners, and the business owners, the stockholders, they always use the Bible as the Old Testament as a basis that slavery was legal and justified, and God gives you the plan on how to do it. But they never do read the part. They never will quote the part where if they want to leave, that they can leave.
And was there any instant that was the hair that broke the camel's back that made you finally leave Christianity after so many decades, or was it simply you kind of reflected on all that you'd been through and said, "That's it, I'm done"?
Well, for a little backstory for the reader, for the listeners, for the time I was in the 12 years old, in the 6th grade, I attended a private Christian school, and because my parents were divorced, I was given utter hell 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. The good little Christian kids would sit on Mondays were the worst day of all. They would sit in the cafeteria, and they would point at me and they would laugh, and okay, that happens to everybody. But the things that they would say is they would make up these big elaborate stories that no way that could be true about what they did with their fathers over the weekend, how they went fishing and they caught 14-pound fish or whatever, or they went to the Smoky Mountains and did this, all these elaborate stories that was impossible to happen. And then they'd look at me and they'd say, of course, he ain't got no daddy. He's going to hell because his parents are divorced. It was constant. And then if that wasn't bad enough, then the hittings and the beatings started. It was, and the teachers would sit there and watch it and would just go on about having their meal. They would never once stop it because, why? Because my parents were divorced. Therefore, they must be going to hell, and if they're going to hell, then I'm going to hell. What am I doing at a Christian school? So after about 3-4 years of being there, I was kicked out, unjustly kicked out, by one of the teachers and her son, who was a co-student of mine, and I was thrown into the public school system, which I had absolutely no training or background to adapt to the secular school system, and no social skills whatsoever. The school that I went to had no emphasis on academics whatsoever. It was all biblical study. Oh, incidentally, every Christian school that opened up in the state of Alabama, in northeast Alabama, where I'm from originally, every single one opened up in 1972. Well, what's so special about 1972? That's the year that forced integration in the public school system happened. All these Christian schools that opened up and popped up, it wasn't about training up a child in the Lord by the way that is right, unquote. It was about we can't have them going to school with all these little niggers. That's what the whole thing was. Okay. But anyway, so here I was in a public school system in high school, had absolutely no peer group. And one day I happened to wear a Black Sabbath T-shirt. And I happened to get a book out of the school library about folklore or omens or something like that. This little idiot bitch about 200 years old, pointed at me across the room and said that I had checked out a book about Satanism. She saw my T-shirt and said, "Look there, he's a Satanist." And she started going off on me, started preaching on me. Well, the next thing you know, I had to physically fight my way down out of the library, down the hallway to my next class, and that's the way it was for the remainder of high school. I was constantly beaten. I was in a fight every single day of my high school academic life. And the irony is that no teacher ever intervened. They would get me and teachers would pull me out of class and paddle me for absolutely no reason whatsoever, except that I'm a Satanist. Well, he was kicked out of a Christian school, and he's wearing a Black Sabbath concert T-shirt, so therefore he must be a Satanist. And students would come by, and when they would come into the classroom, they would walk down the aisle. They would hit me in the head with books. They would hit me in the head with their fists. They would elbow me, and every single one of them, while the teacher was sitting there at the desk, every single one of them would say something similar to, "You know, my parents said that they don't care if I get expelled for kicking the shit out of you because you're a fucking Satanist." That's a quote. That's actually a direct quote from a man named Stephen LaFollette. Well, he's a man now, but then he was in my class. Anyway, that happened for the 3.5, 4 years that I was in high school. And finally, after a while, they just continually labeled me as a Satanist, as anti-Christian. And the whole time, I was at home on weekends. While they were out smoking pot and drinking and doing whatever they were doing, I was at home in bed, laying in bed, writing sermons on the weekends and studying the Bible. And then they were the ones who were terrorizing me and saying that I was anti-Christian and a Satanist. But the thing that got me was that God never came through for me. And I would sit there and I would cry out to God. My parents were no help. And I would cry out to God and I would say, "Why are you allowing this to happen? Why?" And finally, after a while, I thought, if you kick a dog long enough, he's not going to come back in your yard, even if he's your dog. So finally, I just started breaking away out of feeling abandoned and rejected by God. But nobody ever told me this, and I didn't realize this till about a year ago. Even though I knew the scripture, it didn't come alive for me. God never keeps you from the fire. He never keeps you from the fiery trial. He never keeps you from the lion's den. He helps you get through it. When Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the book of Daniel in the Old Testament, when they were taken to the fiery furnace, God didn't keep them from that. God didn't make Nebuchadnezzar and twist his mind and say, "Oh, okay, these are 3 righteous men, and I'm not going to do that to them." No, he hardened his heart and made them put them through it. And then when he came out, when the 3 little boys came out, then God changed Nebuchadnezzar's heart. And when Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, Daniel wasn't kept from going into the lion's den. He was saved through the lion's den. And I didn't realize those examples, especially with Joseph. God, the character of Joseph at the end of Genesis, I don't know why that never spoke to me. But Joseph, he was beaten by his brothers and left for dead. And then one of them said, "Oh, wait a minute, here comes a traveling caravan." And so they sold him into slavery to an Egyptian. He ends up, years later as an adult, he's falsely accused of rape from his master's wife, Potiphar's wife. He's thrown into prison. And at the end, he's brought out of prison. But God never kept him from the pit and being beaten by his brothers. He never kept him from being falsely accused for rape. He never kept him from the prison, but God carried him all the way through. And I knew the stories, but I had never applied it to my life because, I always thought of it as literal. I never took it as mythology to apply it to our, individual lives in the modern day. And once I did that, about a year ago, my eyes opened up and I said, "Oh my God, that's what was happening. I was being taken through the fire, but I got through the fire." So.
Yeah, and another thing about your book, I find it interesting because not only do you review Christianity, but you also talk about Deepak Chopra, Joel Osteen, Oprah, and you say the problem, which includes obviously modern evangelical Christianity with their materialism and easy answers, is that they preach the easy gospel. What do you mean by the easy gospel?
Well, for one, there's no such thing as an easy gospel. And that's what's being preached on every TV preacher. If they're not preaching money gospel, they're preaching easy gospel. And that's what Oprah and Epoch and Billy Graham, all these people do. We're all led to believe that one day you walk down a church aisle and you get saved, quote unquote, get saved, like John Wayne says, now get saved. I actually stole that from a preacher. But anyway, the word saved in the Greek is the word sozo. And it doesn't mean save me from this point forward. It doesn't mean save me from this instance or save me from this point forward. It means to save me all the way from the very beginning all the way to the very end. So when somebody and that's also the word whole. Your faith has made you whole. That's the word sozo also. And every single time that the word saved is used in the Gospels, in the New Testament, it's the word sozo. It's the same as the word shema. In the Hebrew, the word shema is the word forever, or it's also the word one of the words used for eternity. And in our Western mindset in the 21st century, we think forever means from this point on the clock and the calendar forward. It doesn't. It means all the way from this point forward and this point all the way back to the beginning. So being saved is a continual process. It's a continual saving. There is no, it's not easy at all. Jesus said, strive to enter in at the straight gate. The word strive there is the word agonizomai, which is where we get our word agony and agonize from. It's a continual struggle. It's a continual fight. If you look back, okay, that's our New Testament example. You have to have two witnesses in order to establish anything in God's kingdom. So there's one witness. Actually the second witness. The first witness is Jacob, who became Esau. Jacob, brother of Esau, who became Israel. What he did, he laid there and he struggled with Jehovah's angel overnight. And he wrestled with him and he struggled with him. And in the morning, he was blessed by Jehovah's angel and he was given a limp. That's a figurative story. That's not a real story. It's not a literal story. It's figurative for us. When we struggle with God's words and we struggle with his identity and we struggle with the situations in our life, that's when we're saved. That's the struggle. That's the being saved from the beginning point to the end point. There's not one walk down a salvation aisle at a big Baptist church or a Catholic church where you go down and take the little crackers and grape juice, the Jesus cracker, and that's not being saved. That's a one-time ego-latent event. It's figurative. Everything in the Old Testament and everything in the New Testament is figurative. There's not one bit of literal work there at all. The fact, and there are little hints that are thrown in. Say, okay, well, I can kind of see that that Jacob would wrestle with God's angel and he would push his little hip out of sight. Well, wait a minute. If there were really an angel, do you think that a human being could actually wrestle with an angel and win? And you take a step back farther. When he laid down that night, he pulled rocks and stones together to use as pillows. Well, we don't do that as humans. So that's another part telling us, hey, hey, dear reader, this is figurative. Apply it to your life.
I know Paul does say that we should work on our salvation with fear and trembling. So even Paul is saying that it's not a one-time thing. And it never was for him, because you can tell he's struggling throughout all of his letters.
Yeah, Paul. I'm glad you mentioned that. Paul is a very good example of this. I don't hold a lot of faith in Paul's teachings. I think they were so bastardized so much after the fact that from somebody who had absolutely no idea of Judaism. But Paul, and I've heard some authors on your that you've interviewed, and some that I found in bookstores on the internet. And most people want to say that Paul never had any knowledge of a historical Jesus. That he never mentioned him. Well, he did. There's two Jesuses in the Bible, and they're both mentioned by Paul. Paul in 1 or 2 Corinthians, and then later in 2 Timothy, Paul says, hey, Timothy, you got two preachers coming your way. Their names are Hymenaeus and Philetus. Now, they're preaching a gospel that I have not brought to you, and they preach another spirit, another gospel, and another resurrection. They preach that the resurrection is a past one-time event. He says, do not give them Godspeed. Do not even acknowledge who they are, because that's a false doctrine that spreads like a canker or a gangrene. Now, what is this resurrection that is past a one-time event in the past. That has to be the resurrection of Jesus. So what Hymenaeus and Philetus were doing, they were running around and they were saying, hey, Jesus of Nazareth came here, born of a virgin. They were telling that story, and Jesus was crucified on a cross, and in 3 days he rose again. The resurrection happened. It was a literal event. Paul says, no. It was not a literal event. It was a figurative event. The resurrection is in us daily. Paul uses that expression several times through supposed writings of him, that the resurrection is a daily event, but not a one-time event.
And Keith, you mention in your book that the laws and parabolic examples of the OT are the most perfect set of instructions that have ever been conceived. Could you explain this?
I'm going to use the words kosher and kashrut here, but I don't hold any stock in those words. But I'm going to use them as a point of reference because that's what we all know the words kosher and kashrut, which is acceptable, clean cooking and cooking procedure of food that the Jews follow. But they got that from a literal extraction or literal interpretation from the written scriptures. And it's one of the things that they do when they talk about kosher is they say that you cannot cook a kid in its mother's boil a kid, an animal, in its mother's milk. Well, if you take that, if you go and if you parse out the that verse, what it's saying is you're not supposed to cook an animal or eat an animal that's still suckling, that hasn't been weaned yet. So you can't eat veal. But what they'll do is they have two sets of pans, one that has dairy that can be used to cook dairy products and one that can be used to cook meat. And they never cook one and the other. But that's not what the verse is saying because they take it as a literal. But if we follow the kosher laws, for lack of a better term, kosher, if we follow the laws that are in Torah about diet, we wouldn't have hardly any illness. See, the Jews don't believe, or Jehovah, the writers of the Old Testament, never promised us an afterlife. They made a hint on 2, maybe 3 different occasions about the resurrection of the just. So that's probably figurative. But even if it's not, the whole structure of Torah is for the here and now world. There is no consideration of an afterlife. If we follow kosher laws, for one, we're not supposed to eat shellfish, okay? Oysters, lobsters, clams. Well, they're all bottom feeders. They all eat the feces and the dirt and the drag that's on the bottom of the waterbed there. None of the animals that we're allowed to eat other animals or eat garbage or eat feces. But shrimp, everybody loves shrimp. Everybody wants to go to Red's Lobster or Joe's Crab Shack and get a bucket of shrimp. And I love them. They're great. I live in New Orleans. You can't help but eat shrimp. But there is a component in shrimp, as an example, in shrimp, that causes arthritis. That's a physical thing. That's not God. When God says there are, and I use the term God for lack of a better term, but when God says, "Do not eat shellfish," that's not because don't eat shellfish because I said so, and therefore you're not going to heaven, and you're going to have to kill 4 rams for this sin of eating shellfish. That's not what it is. It's because it will affect you negatively here on earth. When things are deemed as unclean, clean and unclean, that's King James English. That's Shakespearean English, Middle English. Today we would say that's not sanitary or that's not hygienic. That's what we would say now. Each one of the animals and each one of the instructions were for hygienic, sound, dietary laws, or they were for dignity and for the quality of life and the quality of death of the animal, every single one. And if we followed those laws, think about, and I go through this. I eat pork and I eat shrimp and I eat oysters on occasion. And the reason I do that is because what are my alternatives? If I eat chicken breast and hamburger meat, look at all the contagions and the hormones and all the terrible breeding conditions. That's not healthy. That's not being kosher or being clean. If I say, well, I'm just going to eat pasta, I'm going to eat pasta and salads. Well, when I go look at my box of pasta, all that's shot with bleached white flour and all these preservatives, and if everything is killing us that we eat. So in order to get around, say, okay, well, I'm going to obey God's laws and not eat kosher, and eat kosher, for lack of a better word, well, I'm still not increasing my diet or any safe eating habits because I'm eating junk that's made from a chemist somewhere at General Mills in Naperville, Illinois. So, and then another thing is, is the laws. How could you go wrong with feed and clothe the poor, the widow, the orphan, and the stranger in the land? See, that's one boy, the stranger in the land. You won't ever hear a preacher, especially a Republican, will never mention that, because the word stranger there is illegal immigrant, illegal alien. See, all these right-wing Republican, good Christian folk, well, even Democrats too, they want to build this fence, and they want to have these illegal aliens, their driver's license taken from them. They want to deport them by the busloads back over to Mexico or down to South of Central America. Well, guess what? You just broke God's law. God says you're supposed to treat them with dignity. You're supposed to feed them, house them, every bit. He said, because remember, he told the Israelites, remember, you were once strangers in a strange land, talking about Egypt and Canaan. You were once strangers in a strange land, and I mean bound and determined that you're going to do this. And every time he mentions taking care of the widow, the orphan, the alien, no matter the poor, every single time after he mentions taking care of them, he gives his instructions. After that, he throws in a warning. And if you don't, I will make your children fatherless. I'll come after you with a sword, and I'll do this and this and this and this to you and to your offspring. Every single time. That's how important it was. The reason that the children of Israel were taken out of northern Israel and southern Judah, and northern Israel was taken to Assyria, and southern Judah was taken to Babylon, the reason was because they didn't keep their Sabbath and they didn't keep God's law. It wasn't because they didn't bow properly at the temple and light the right candle or the right candlestick, and they didn't sprinkle the blood to the left when it's supposed to be to the right or anything like that. Every single time admonition, you look in Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Daniel, every single one was they didn't observe their Sabbath, which doesn't mean one day a week. It means sabbatical and the year of Jubilee. And they didn't take care of the poor, the orphan, the widow, and the stranger.
You also mentioned that the Bible is a very communistic book. What do you mean by that?
Capitalism is the doctrine of the devil. I actually wrote that put this in there in my other book, Above, Below, Within. The word daemon in the Greek, word devil is the word daemon in the New Testament text. It means to distribute fortunes. And that's exactly what capitalism is. Whereas in the book of Acts, and the early church had all things in common. People sold their houses, gave their money from the sales of the houses to the apostles, and the ones who had businesses kept their businesses, so they had an income generated that would come in, that would go into the treasury, to the fund. And what was it that they did? On the Sabbath, our Saturday, they would go to the synagogues and they would preach Jesus and the kingdom of God had come. But then on the first day of the week, they would go out and they would distribute everything they had to the poor, the widow, and the orphan, and the stranger. And that was actually a better testimony than it was on that one day of the week on the Sabbath. And the Old Testament, okay, that's your New Testament, that's your second witness. Your first witness is all the way through the Old Testament. Okay, gleaning, for example. Farmers were not allowed to trim the edges of the fields. That was left for the poor, the widow, the orphan, and the stranger in the land. If a farmer ever dropped anything, any of his grain, on the ground, if it ever fell off the back of a truck, fell off the back of a mule, if it ever touched the ground, he was forbidden. It was illegal to pick it up. It had to be left there for the poor. So on every farm, and that's not including the tithe that he had to give of that grain when they took it to the temple. And people say, preachers will always say, yeah, you're supposed to give 10% and then up to 20 to 23%. And give it. Now, it's not so you can have a jet plane and fly around the world in a $4,000 designer suit. That was to feed the poor and the orphan and the widow. Also, the year of Jubilee and the Sabbath, every 7 years, they took a year off, a sabbatical. That's what college professors do. They say, well, I'm on sabbatical. They get paid, and they get to keep their benefits for a whole year while they do further in-depth research. They write and publish and this and that. Okay, that's kind of easy for us to understand. But what they did every 7th year and every 50th year, they didn't work. Absolutely no work was done, no farming, no gleaning, nothing. Also, every 50th year, the year of Jubilee, the acceptable year of the Lord, all debts were forgiven. if you owed $4,000 and you borrowed it 2 days beforehand, didn't matter. You didn't owe it. 2 days later, you didn't owe it. All the land went back to the original tribes, to the original owners. Everybody was brought to zero. Everybody was on a level playing field. And can you imagine Donald Trump? Say he's 60. Say Donald Trump's 60 years old. I don't know how. Let's say he's 60 years old. And can you imagine him thumbing through the calendar and saying, "Oh, wait a minute, I've been in business for 60 years. Man, I got to give this casino. I don't mind giving it to ex-wives as long as they're pretty when I first marry them, and they got my kids." And so I don't know. Can you imagine him turning it over to say, "Okay, look, go out. We're in Atlantic City. Hey, everybody, go pit boss. Go out there to the boardwalk and get all those bums and those drunks underneath there. Get all the welfare mothers who are in here cleaning up my hotel rooms. Bring them in here. They're all getting stock. I'm selling the whole thing and I'm giving it to them in stock. I'm paying them up." Can you imagine that? No, that's not going to happen. Well, actually, that never happened back then. I think there's like maybe one king that actually did it. There's like 3 or 4 kings that actually followed God's laws. And but what would happen every time that they would do that they would follow God's laws, he always gave them peace. He always gave them plenty. And another thing these TV preachers talk about, I got to say this real quick. These TV preachers talk about, see here in the Bible, it says if you give your tithes and your offerings and you have abundance, you have a land full of milk. God was saying all those words to people, to a nation of slaves who were coming out of Egypt, who had nothing, who didn't have enough to eat, who had no clothes, who had no health care, who had absolutely nothing, that were coming out from these little mud huts, the straw huts that they lived in, and working 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. So whenever God says, "I'm going to give you an abundance and bless you above and beyond more than you can hold," yeah, their stomachs couldn't hold anything like that. So for them to have 3 meals a day and a place to sleep at night that was safe and protected, and it didn't have a taskmaster coming in, whip them in the back, that was a big deal to them. So our modern day sensitivities can't understand that. So don't listen to TV preachers. Tell your people not to listen to any stupid TV preachers. But back to communism, everything that God did was socialist and communist. All of his mandates, all of his laws, every single one of them. And Jesus turned around and followed that tradition because he was actually preaching he was actually being the second witness to God's laws. And even though Paul and the early apostles started off.
So, Keith, what exactly are your views on the historicity of Jesus and Jehovah being anthropomorphic?
I don't believe that Jesus was a real person, and I don't believe he was the Son of God. Right now, it's 7 minutes after 2 Central Standard Time. Now, in 3 minutes, I want to change that opinion. I'm going to say, "Oh my God, look at this! How could this not be true? How could he not be a real person? My God, it was right here in front of me the whole time. I knew it, but I just didn't bring it to life." And then at 3 o'clock in the morning when I get up to go pee, I'm going to say, "Oh, man, he can't be a real person because look at this scripture and look at this example and look at Justin Martyr said this." It's a struggle. And no, he's not true. He's not real. But we anthropomorphize them because we have to identify with them. They're written down as if they were real people for us to understand the life lessons, the mythology, and it makes so much sense to us, and it quickens our spirit, and it brings a tear to our eyes sometimes when we read, "Oh my God, that's the most perfect thing that's ever been written." Even if it didn't come from God and a prophet and 2 angels, the fact that a human being could conceive that, our higher self, collective unconscious, threw that to us, and it's lasted this long. This is beautiful. So we have to bring that as humans. We try to bring that understanding, that spirit, and that emotion in mind, and try to put it into a body. And I catch myself all the time. I'll sit here and I'll say a prayer to God. I thank Him for when I'm eating or something, or when I have the money for my power bill or whatever, and I'll start talking to Him, and I'll catch myself and I say, "Oh God, I can't believe I'm sitting here talking to a spirit as if it were a person sitting on a throne wearing a white robe and white hair and a white beard." Because I know that's not true. But as a human, I try to identify with that. And that's a struggle. And it goes back to Jacob/Israel wrestling with God's angel and wrestling with him. And then God saying, "Hey, you know what? You win, but you really can't win this thing. And I'm gonna push in the inner part of your thigh, and you're going to walk with a limp for the rest of your life. And that's the way we are when we come to realize this damn red pill, blue pill scenario. When we get the knowledge, the gnosis, and we realize that how perfect the law is, and that we're trying to anthropomorphize these deities into real beings instead of spirits, and it's a struggle, and we limp along in life trying to explain it to ourselves and trying to put words to what it is that we feel and what it is that we want to proclaim and how we want to do this in our life and help other people. And you can't do, it can't be done. We're human. We have limited minds. We have limited spirits and limited intellects. We can't express something that we don't understand wholly. Imagine Alexander Graham Bell a year before he actually invented the telephone, when he had the idea of some type of construct that would send electrical impulses. Imagine him trying to explain that to somebody at the hardware store when he was getting parts, or trying to piece something together. And the guy, I'm sure that the hardware store guy, or the blacksmith, stood there, looked at him and thought, "Man, Alex has been out there drinking that Jack early in the morning. Listen to this rambling that he's doing." And that's the way I feel right now, trying to explain and describe to you how I feel about something that I'm not sure about, that I struggle with.
Well, I know one thing that you don't struggle with, and we've talked about it before, but in a rebuke of the Christian church, you say that Jesus couldn't have died for our sins. Why is that, Keith?
Okay, I'll stipulate for the moment that Jesus was the Son of God who came to earth to die for our sins. Well, he got some bad instructions because it couldn't happen. Because Paul, all through Paul's writings, 13, 14 books of the New Testament, plus Timothy and John, they all say Jesus was the Passover lamb who died for the remission of sins. Well, guess what? The Passover lamb was not for the remission of sins. That was the goat on the Day of Atonement. Those are two different Jewish festivals, two completely different Jewish events, and it was impossible. Now, somebody's going to come up and say, but it says there in Exodus or Leviticus, whichever one of the two is in. I don't have my notes in front of me. They're going to say, but it says 2 goats, the sins of the nation are imparted onto the one, and the other one is sacrificed. And it's going to say if a goat is not available, a lamb or a ram is a substitute. But never, ever once did Jesus or the writers of the Old Testament or the writers of the New Testament, never once did anybody ever give a positive attribute to a goat. Jesus even said, on the day of acceptable year of the Lord, the day of judgment, I'm going to divide the goat from the sheep. Every single time, goats are a negative, sinful being. Esau is equated with a goat, whereas Israel is equated with a lamb, with a sheep. So it is impossible. But we don't understand, because somebody's going to say, well, Pilate. Let me tell you what Pilate did. Now, this is one of the writers of the New Testament. This is one of those things that I struggle with, and I think anybody after hearing this will too. The writers of the New Testament either knew very little about Hebraic law, or they knew nothing about Hebraic law, or they knew a whole lot about Hebraic law. And here are the 3 reasons why. Pontius Pilate stood there, and he said, when he was trying to get him to take Barabbas, but instead he took Jesus. They wanted Jesus. And he said, I find no fault with this man, talking about Jesus. Those are the exact same words that are given in the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of the Masoretic text, that every single high priest at the temple, and before that the tabernacle, sat there and would thumb through the coat of the lamb and say, okay, there's no spot or blemish here. I find this acceptable to sacrifice as an offering to God. I find no fault in it. And they would take it and they would move it into the pen, and the next one in line would come. Some Christian apologist is going to say, see, if God put those words in Pontius Pilate's mouth, that means that he had to have been a sacrifice for sin. But that's called quick writing. Somebody had a good quill that day, because not
Right,
Passover.
right.
The Passover lamb was for with the blood of the Passover was so the death angel would pass over the nation of Israel and would protect them and would not destroy them and would not take their firstborn.
And there's nothing in the Old Testament that says lambs are for the remission of sins.
No,
Nothing at all.
You got bullocks, rams, goats, not sheep exclusively. You got a whole host of for sin. For one type of sin offering, you might have 4 bales of grain, 2 bales of barley, and a turtle dove. And then for another type of sin, you might have a sheep, a he-goat, and a lamb, and 2 ewes, and a bull. And then another, but on the Day of Atonement, no, that was daily, everyday sin. Okay, that food that was slaughtered, it wasn't that Jehovah was bloodthirsty, as many have said, and as I too have written. It wasn't that Jehovah was bloodthirsty. That food went to feed the priesthood who did not have an inheritance, and the poor, the orphan, the widow, the stranger in the land. That's where all those tithes and offerings and those sacrifices went. But on the Day of Atonement, the one day of the year, when all the sins of Israel were blotted out and they started over new, that was a goat.
And what other misconceptions of Jesus do you shed light in your book? I think you mentioned one that Jews have been saying for years, that Jesus would be considered a necromancer.
Well, when Jesus was transfigured on the Mount, he saw Elijah and Moses. I can't remember who it was right now. He saw the two biblical figures there. That's necromancy. That's sin in God's law. Remember the witch of Endor when King Saul went and disguised himself and said, "Hey, I need to speak to Samuel, my prophet who's dead." And the witch of Endor. By the way, that's where we get the name Endora from the TV show Bewitched. The witch of Endor. TV producers know more about the Bible than a Baptist deacon does, Miguel. Isn't it a shame? It's a damn shame. So he goes and he said, and the witch of Endor says, "Well, I don't know what you're talking about. King Saul said that he'd put anybody to death that would do anything like that." And he hit him. He hit himself and he paid her. And then when Samuel's spirit came, he said, "Why have you bothered my rest?" And that's another thing about the afterlife. Why have you bothered my rest? Not, why did you take me out of paradise? Hey, I was sitting there eating with 7 virgins, and I was sitting at God's feet, and I was bowing with the angels. My rest, my sleep. Why have you brought me out of my sleep? Sleep is death. So I'll throw that in there. Anyway, so that was necromancy, and that was forbidden. That's a sin. When Jesus went on his vision quest, when he was tempted by Satan, he fasted for 40 days, and then Satan came, and he tempted him with the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. And then Jesus said, "You know what? I'm going to take the right-hand path. I want to do what I'm supposed to do, and I know I could have these 3 things." But he didn't know that because he was Jesus, the Son of God, the Greek Messiah, who had these magical powers. That's every individual that goes through a vision quest. The vision quest has been around. Every society since in recorded history has had that vision quest. And it is when you sit there and you wrestle with your demons. Oh, wait a minute. Here we are back to Jacob and / Israel wrestling with God again. Man, it's just all over the place, isn't it?
Yeah, no kidding.
It's all over the place. I just see us sitting here talking about it casually with my landlord downstairs probably wondering what the hell I'm talking about. And then all of a sudden, boom, that just hit me right between the eyes. But the vision quest thing, okay, so that was a pagan rite of passage. Well, we can't have any paganism because we're not supposed to. It says not even supposed to ask our neighboring pagan nations how they worship their gods and how they do their rituals. But then you want to go through again and say, well, what else did Jesus do as a sin? And others, I've got a list of them in the book, but it's all figurative. We have, and I did this. I used to be an atheist Bible basher, and I would pull, and I'm saying when I say I used to do this, I'm talking about up to last week, and then probably tomorrow morning I'm going to do it again. It's just something that it's such a part of me, but it's that wrestle and that struggle. say, well, you know what, this word in the Koine Greek, this actually means this instead of that. It's been preached this way for 200 years, but it's actually this. Boy, I can really mess up the theology. I can prove this and prove it. You know what? What are you proving or disproving? It's all figurative. It's not literal. It never was literal. I'm going to misquote this, and I don't have the scripture in front of me, but there's no temptation given to me that is uncommon to all men. Okay, what that says is, taking it in modern context, Miguel, you've never had a temptation that I have not had myself. So that means if your next door neighbor looked at that little 4-year-old girl and thought, even though he didn't act on it, he just turned around and walked away and would never act on it. If he had that temptation, that means you did, your wife did, I did, my daughter did, your son did. Every single human being in this world is tempted. There's nothing new under the sun, Horatio. There is no temptation given to man that is not common to all men. So, every single trial that Jesus went through, every single thing that Jacob went through, Esau, with every single thing that any character in the Bible went through or has gone through, it's the same for us. It's all figurative. There's not one literal bone in the Bible.
Well, I think that's all the time we have today, Keith. Definitely like to thank you very much for coming back on Aeon Byte and giving us an amazing discussion. And I must tell the listener that the examples Keith gives on the hypocrisy of Christianity and the insights he finds in the Bible are but a small fraction that you can find in his booklet.
So I mentioned the little 5-year-old girl next door. All of a sudden you want to jump off the line here.
No, I am sinless like all those Christians, pastors. You know, the first thing the Bible tells us is that we're all sinners, but one thing you encountered a lot is you'd be talking to a pastor about some issue and he'd say, I'm not a sinner. So that's what cracked me up.
There are a lot of good examples in here. This is all first-hand account, and I'll be verified. Got the verification. I really hope that your listeners will get a copy of this. It's just $10, and I'm giving $5 of it to you, to Aeon Byte, because you, like Paul, bring the gospel every week without charge. And any time I've ever asked you for a recording or any information from Jim West or anything, you've always turned right around and given it to me, and never once have asked me for any payment or anything. So I want to, everybody out there should go through Miguel's shopping cart, his list of recordings and everything. Pick out a couple of things you want, and make sure you support his. And I called it earlier when we were pre-interview, I called it a ministry, and I really do believe it is a ministry, Miguel. And so anybody, all you do is after you buy the ebook online on my website, shoot me an email, and then I'll send $5, half of it, to Aeon Byte.
Well, thank you. And what's the email address, Keith?
The email address is on the website. It's put on the Nicholson @nolamagic.com, and then I'm sure you'll have a link up to the website, nolamagic.com, NOLAMAGICK.com, and then find the books to buy and burn link, and it's the first one there. It's an ebook, and then you'll see my email address there at the bottom. Just hit that. Let me know that you bought a book, an ebook, and from listening to Miguel, and then I'll shoot you $5 for every one.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I certainly appreciate it. Could certainly use it. All right, Keith, my friend. Well, it was good talking to you, and it's always great having you on Aeon Byte.
Thank you very much, Miguel. Thanks for having me back.
I'm concerned with the structure. I'm concerned with the systems of control. Those that control my life and those that seek to control it.
It's up to each and every one of us to turn loose of just some of the greedy, the hatred, the envy, and yes, the insecurities. Because those that seek to control make us feel pathetic. So we'll willingly give up our sovereignty, our liberty, our destiny. We have got